Hi, my name is Dr. Linda Harvey. I'm a board certified psychiatrist, and I'm also the wife of Reverend Dr. Marcus Harvey, pastor of Greater Mount Carmel AME Church in Doraville, Georgia. Today, I would like to talk about when the holidays aren't always happy. So, the holidays are a time where people can expect to um, have gatherings where people are expected to be happy, spending time with significant others, with family members, close family members, extended family members, with friends. You think of picture perfect food, you think of soap opera magazine worthy decorations, you see TV ads where a significant other, a husband or a wife, blesses their significant other with a big beautiful car that has a big red bow on top of it. You think about Hallmark movies where everyone's dreams come true. These are some of the images and some of the things we think about when we think about the holidays coming up. Although Jesus is the reason for the season, specifically for Christmas, um, we do also expect these traditions to occur as well. However, when sometimes the relationships that we have, or if we are really missing a loved one around this time of year, when those things occur, they can make the holidays not as happy as they seem like they are for everyone else. And sometimes it helps to talk about this. So first, I like to talk about grief. And just to say that there are many reasons that this might occur. I will be talking about three reasons today. So the first one I'm going to talk about is grief, but the others I'm going to touch on in a moment are going to be loneliness as well as proper boundary setting with families during the holidays. So to discuss grief, grief can occur during bereavement. The bereavement period is the period of time that passes after a loved one dies. Um, However, grief is the pain. Grief is the emotion that we experience when we truly miss a loved one. Um, and it can also happen when you foresee a loss coming up, an impending loss. So, for example, if you have a family member who has end-stage cancer or dementia, you can see that loss coming up, and you can begin to grieve even before they pass away. So certainly so once they do pass away. But you can also have grief over a relationship ending, a relationship that was and is not presently, even if the person is alive. So grief can occur in many ways, and that can include estranged family members, that can include the death of a friendship, and also the loss of a pet. Some people who may not be close to people in their lives may have had a pet or pets that they were very close to. And so grief can occur for many, many reasons. And grief is usually commensurate or directly associated with how much you loved that person when they were here on earth or when you were talking to them on a regular basis. The closer you were, the greater the grief. There are times where where you may have really liked somebody very much, and you really hated to hear that they passed away, but it may not affect you as much as it does to someone in your close inner circle who you really love, and who you had a lot of great memories with. So there's typical grief. Typical grief tends to occur in the first few months after that person's passing. And during that time, it's just very a foggy, kind of unclear time. Emotions are all over the place. Um, Sometimes when you look back over those first few months after one of your close loved ones passed away, you kind of think, I don't really remember everything that happened. It was just all such a blur. Yes, we planned the funeral. Yes, we attended the funeral. People called, I spoke to people, but it was all just a complete blur. And that's not uncommon. Then it takes about maybe, so you're just really kind of in shock still in those first few months. Then it takes about a full year before people commonly report getting back to themselves, just kind of feeling like a little bit more like themselves. But that can certainly take more than a year. So there's definitely not a one size fits all when it comes to grief. Sometimes it could take 2 years or even more. It all depends on how close that person was with you, and it depends on how well you process grief. So, um, Oh, and then also if one doesn't process grief as much, then that the grief could extend for decades sometimes. It's not uncommon that I've heard people say that it felt like they passed just yesterday, and this was like 20 years ago. So if it's not processed, grief can definitely continue. Grief has highs and lows. It comes in pangs, it comes in spurts. It's very possible to have a good day. And then next thing you know, then you're crying and it just feels like it came out of nowhere. And that's okay. That's all part of it. And that's all completely very, very typical of normal grief. Um, some of the first things that we tend to see when someone is experiencing typical grief, though, are difficulty with sleep, especially in that first 2 to 3 months that I mentioned. So, difficulty sleeping during that time. Um, you'll also have difficulty with focus or concentration, and then you'll also have irritability. So, those are three of the most common symptoms that initially began when one is experiencing acute grief or very current, strong grief symptoms. Sometimes people even report feeling like they see their loved ones, like fleeting moments where they feel like they saw their loved one or felt like the loved one came to them in a dream. Most commonly, I hear people say that they felt like their loved one told them that they're going to be okay, that everything's all right, that they're all right, that the loved one will be all right. Um, so those are typical things that we see in normal grief. And then there's complicated grief, and complicated grief um, becomes depression very quickly. Complicated grief is a more unhealthy form of grief, where again one can transition into depression, but it really is based on the individual simply not being able to accept the reality of the loss. And if you've ever heard someone say, I don't want to live anymore if this person is not living, then that's an example of complicated grief, where that person really truly feels like they cannot live anymore, and sometimes even attempt suicide as a result. And this can also occur sometimes with divorces, for example, like they really feel like they cannot live on with that other individual. So these are examples of complicated grief, where the person feels hopeless, um, where they just really have an inability to have any positive moments, really. Um, and where it feels like they're just unable to have any positive moments, or remember the good memories. It feels like they can only just feel the sadness, just the overwhelming sadness. Um, there's a woman I spoke to once where she lost her daughter, and her daughter was everything to her, and that was the person she was closest to in life. And she told me after several months after her daughter passed, she told me that she had a happy moment, and she was watching something on TV and she had a happy moment and she laughed. And then right after she laughed, she told herself, no, I can't laugh because then that means I'm not missing my daughter. I can't be happy because that means I'm not missing her. And that's not what that means. There are going to be times where it just feels like it's a regular day, and there's going to be other times where it's anything but a regular day. And it's okay to sometimes feel joy because you're on the road to healing from the loss. So, some tips to heal from the loss. Number one, allowing yourself permission to grieve. Allowing yourself permission to grieve. There are many times where we are not modeled always how to process emotions in life, and similarly how to grieve. Um, there are some people who fully allow themselves to experience the the memories, the pain, the trauma of losing that person. And there are others who have been taught, whether consciously or subconsciously, to just stuff those feelings, keep it moving. It happened, so what? We have work to do. I still have to go to work. I still have to do this. I still have to do that. So no point in stopping to think about that. And what happens is grief just gets prolonged when that happens, and the person is still hurting. That pain is still there. It just tends to seep out and come out in other ways. Um, and then allowing other people to grieve too. Allowing family members who may have also known the loved one who is no longer with us to grieve. Um, Getting good sleep is very, very, very helpful. You may even have to, because I mentioned earlier that that's one of the initial symptoms to occur is lack of sleep. You may even have to use a sleep aid, over the counter, non habit forming, of course. So, like melatonin, for example, or ZQuil, and not necessarily forever, but just for a little while until you can reset your sleep schedule, and you'll feel better the next day as well. And of course, that's if you weren't already having problems sleeping. If you were already having problems sleeping, then something else may be going on that warrants a doctor visit. Avoiding substances is extremely helpful. So you want to avoid any kind of substance use and just kind of delving into numbing the pain. Any kind of addictive behaviors, alcohol, drug use, gambling. Um, some people pick at their skin or pull their hair. Some people have sex addictions as well. So you want to avoid getting into unhealthy practices, unhealthy coping mechanisms, because what happens is it encourages avoidance. It becomes a form of denial, and then the issues are still there. So when you come to, they're still there, and then that makes one in turn want to, if alcohol is the issue, want to then grab another drink again to not deal with that pain. Compartmentalizing your grief is temporarily okay as long as you ultimately process your grief. Just to give a quick story, my father lost his father when he was in law school. And he said that he remembered feeling like he was going to flunk out because he was going through this monumental loss in his life. But he said it turned out that his grades were actually the best that semester out of all the other semesters because he was able to compartmentalize. Okay, this is a very painful thing I'm going through right now, but I'm going to put it right here for right now. And then I'm going to focus on this. And he did eventually come back to this. And if we can do that, sometimes we can't, just drop everything. Sometimes we're caregivers. Sometimes we have children that need to be seen after, caregivers of adult parents. Sometimes a demanding job, and they don't, and you only get a few days off, or if that, or maybe a week or weeks, but certainly not the full bereavement period. Um, and so compartmentalizing grief is okay as long as you come back to it. Saying no. Grief, when one is experiencing grief, that is not a great time to expend extra emotional energy. And even if everybody's like, well, we always have Christmas at your house, or you always make this dish, we have to have your dish, and nobody else can make it like you do. No is a complete and healthy sentence, and it's okay. I give you permission today, and you can tell whoever's giving you a problem to come talk to me about it, because it is okay to say no. Allow people to help. If you truly feel that someone is really genuinely offering you help, take them up on it. Sometimes it's hard for us to ask for help, to accept help, because sometimes when people have let us down when we really needed help, we don't want to feel that feeling anymore. We already needed help. And then when we sought it or somebody offered it and didn't give it like they said they would, now we're hurting even more. But if you really feel like someone is truly genuine, and they really care about you, definitely accept their offer to help for sure. They care about you, which is why they want to help. They want to be able to do something. The myth of the strong one or being strong for someone else often means not dealing with your own grief. So, again, it's okay to not be the strong one. It's okay to be the vulnerable one. It is not okay for the entire family to dump their emotional energy and pain onto you so that they can process and you don't get to. That's not okay. Again, sometimes you can't stop everything, and you still have to caregive, for example. You still have to go to work. You still have to do this or that, but it's not fair to the strong ones in the family for them to shoulder everyone else's emotional burdens, and they suffer. um Except very similarly, do what you can for traditions this year, no pressure. If you're the chef and you usually are the cook in the house and you're the one that usually makes the meals, just maybe this year we're just going to go out to eat, or this year we're going to get most of the food catered, or just other, or everybody's going to bring a dish this year. So it's okay to not do the traditional traditions that you might normally do. You want to be sensitive to others who are missing the same person but may grieve differently, as I mentioned earlier. Just to give an example, I took a grief therapy class. I lost one of my best friends on December 23rd, 2017. And then her birthday was the next day, the 24th. And then, of course, Christmas is the 25th. So we will always spend a lot of time with each other around that time of year. And the grief therapy counselor knew that she passed on the 23rd and said, okay, well, I'm going to call you on the 23rd. You just, give me your number. And I said, no, that's okay. And I was polite about it because I could see that she was genuine about it. But that is not helpful for me. It'll be just my luck that I'll be actually having a good moment. And then that's the time that she will call and then bring that moment down. And we weren't that close either. So, kind of what would we really talk about? Only talk about that. And I just didn't want to talk about that. Not in denial of it, but I just didn't want to do it on those terms. However, I could sense that that was something that she did need or she might need for her grief, that she does want to talk to somebody on the day that on a birthday or a death anniversary of someone she loved. And that's okay. But it's also okay to grieve the way that you grieve and to communicate that to anyone who may not understand. Some people may want to go to the loved one's gravesite on their birthday and let balloons go and make a big, deal out of their birthday. And other people may be like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to the gravesite. And that's okay too. Um, People may feel that they need permission to talk about your loved one, and it may be helpful to do that as well. You know, really kind of going with the flow is best. So using that individual who is grieving as a guide for what to do is works the best. Listening more than talking always works the best. Think of Job and his friends. When they were listening, they were actually doing really great. It was when they started talking that they put their feet in their mouths, and then things went down south. And grief and death are very comfortable topics. And so it's not uncommon that right in the thick of someone hurting, someone tries to comfort them and ends up putting their foot in their mouth. So listening more than talking and then following that person's lead can be very helpful. If someone looks at you and says, hey, please come visit me, absolutely. Okay, I will do it. But if they, then that next day may say, actually, I don't feel up to it. I wanted you to come, but I don't really feel up to it. That's okay. That's okay too, because it's their grief. And that was yesterday, and this is today, and it's all okay. Um, let's see. And very similarly to what I was mentioning as far as not putting one's foot in our mouths, it's also okay to not necessarily say the cliches that we hear around those times. So there's a reason for everything happening. It's okay to sometimes say I don't know why this happened, and that's not necessarily to talk about it per se, but just to say or why it happened, but just say this is tough and I'm here with you, you know. What can I do? What would make you feel better at this time, you know? Then shifting kind of our focus can be very helpful from, man, I wish they were here. Man, I wish they were here. I just miss them so much, to remembering those good memories, which is why you miss them so much. But it's just kind of turning that memory around to just focus on the positive side of the memory, instead of the sad side, which is, man, that was so funny. Let me tell you, by the time we did this, oh, we laughed and laughed and laughed, and it was so funny. So, like that kind of thing where you just remember those really, really good memories. So, counting your blessings, thanking God for allowing you to spend time with that person when they were here on earth. And this just counting all of our blessings. Whenever we're grateful, whenever we think about the ways that God has blessed us, that always lifts our mood, whether we're experiencing grief or not. And you want to maintain your regular self care practices as well. If that is going to get your favorite dessert and watch your favorite show in silence, that's fine. If that is going to the spa and getting a massage, that's okay too. Taking a walk outside, getting some fresh air, maintaining exercise, starting to exercise, all of that can be really helpful. Um, Journaling can be very helpful as well. Saying things out loud. I just really miss this person, or journaling it. All of the emotions that you may be feeling, even if they vary widely from day to day. And then therapy sessions can be very helpful as well. And I do want to talk about grief therapy. Grief therapy can be either with an individual therapist or with the therapist individually, or it can be with a group. And I want to share about Grief Share, which is an organization that I used for grief therapy when I lost my father last year in April of 2024. Um, I lost him, and I'm a psychiatrist. So, I just, I know all the things to do. I just, all the coping skills, everything. Like, if I'm aware of it, then my grief won't be as bad as it would be for somebody else who hasn't had training in this field. And that was not true. And, I really was struggling, and I didn't really realize, that those symptoms I talked about, lack of sleep, irritability, lack of focus, concentration. There were some times where I was just really, really irritable. And that was really why. That I'm just trying to kind of, move about with my day, and I'm still missing my dad. And just really frustrated about that. So, where I would be maybe shorter, fussing at my kids more, a little bit shorter in tone, things like that. And so he passed in April 2024. In October 2024, I was at a work retreat, and we were practicing a mindfulness activity with our eyes closed. And mindfulness is just being super present in the moment, just acknowledging the feelings that you're having, sensations that you're having, all of that, just being very clear about that, and just kind of slowing things down and being present in the moment. And up until that point, I was getting pretty good at, if I felt it coming up, bubbling up, that grief, that pain, tearfulness, then I would just kind of, stop. I'm at work, I can't do it right now, that kind of thing. Or I'm driving, or I don't want to, I'll cry a little bit later, like in the bathroom or something like that. But I could not stop it, and it was like the floodgates were open, and I was just bawling, crying. And I was so glad that that everyone's eyes were closed, so that they didn't see me, but I could not stop it. And I realized I am not okay, and I do need grief therapy. And so I signed up for griefshare.org, GRIEF, grief share, SHARE.org, as in sharing your grief. And it's an organization that has been around for some time now, and they have their sessions in different churches. And so when you go to the website, you put your zip code in, and you can do either an in person group, or you can do a virtual group. I did a virtual group with, I believe it was Trinity AME Church out of Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, but it was very helpful. There were other individuals in this group. We would meet once a week for 3 months, and we had a workbook, and each week we would go through this workbook and talk about all of the different emotions that I was having. And it was so helpful. We would watch these videos about all of the people, all just different people who had people who lost people for so many different reasons. Some passed away from medical conditions. Some had someone to take their life. Some took their own life, and they were of all different relationships. These people that the people that were on the videos talked about their losses, having lost children, babies, adult children, spouses, parents. Um, it was extremely helpful, and I would highly recommend it. Just some losses are not gonna require that, but sometimes you need a little bit of extra help with grief. And in with the case of my dad, I needed extra help with grief. So I do recommend that resource. Um, and the books were, I don't know if I mentioned, but just about $20. And so it wasn't like very expensive. So it was very helpful. I now want to talk about boundary setting and saying no during the holidays or family dysfunction. So we're all part of a family, and you've heard the phrase, we don't get to pick our family, we do get to pick our friends. You're part of a family, but you don't have to be defined by them when their actions or interactions are unhealthy. So I want you to keep that in mind for sure. And you can do many things if you do want to, try to be around the family this year, and join them in join their company. I can definitely understand that. But if there's been a history of negative interactions, then there may be some things that you want to do to kind of protect your own peace. So, for example, sometimes maybe you could maybe not spend the whole day there, but maybe go for a dinner, just for dinner, and then to help clean up a bit, and then to leave, but not necessarily stay there the whole day. Um, Sometimes some people make plans to get with friends or close loved ones the day after and to kind of make it a well rounded holiday. Adjusting expectations is very helpful. We can only control ourselves at the end of the day. That's the only one we can control. Even our kids, we guide them, we teach them, we parent them. But even at 2 years old, the terrible twos or terrific twos, whichever you like to call them, we learn that they are very autonomous with saying no, 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 no. We cannot control, what another human being thinks or sometimes says and does. And so it helps um, to know. Look, we already know Uncle Joe is gonna be arguing with Aunt Catherine all night long. Um, Aunt, Aunt Jolene is gonna be criticizing you from the time you get there to the time you leave. When are you getting married? When are you gonna have a baby? That kind of thing. When are you gonna get a job? So when you have things that you're expecting, adjusting expectations can be helpful, and they may still do those things, but I don't have to be pulled into that, and I don't have to be upset because they're doing that. Very similarly, no one has the right to make you feel bad about yourself. So don't let family members or loved ones pull your puppet strings or push your buttons. Um, and then also similarly, avoiding hot button topics is very helpful. So if you already know that your cousin goes hard for this one politician and loves them, and everybody else is like, "What are you talking about?" There's no point in bringing that up because we already know how that person feels, and it's just going to cause discord, and people are going to get upset. So, avoiding hot button topics is always very helpful. That might, just before the family sits down to dinner, might not be the best time to talk about who owes you money and why. So, trying to avoid hot button topics can be really helpful. Everybody have a nice, pleasant meal if they can, but at least you can do your role in that. You can control yourself. Also, just as a tip in general, not even just around the holidays, but if you can communicate what you do like, what you don't like, what you prefer not to happen, what you prefer to happen, without heightened emotion, when it comes to family members or friends or whoever, actually, you're more likely to get a lot farther, and the person is more likely to hear what you're saying. There are some people that the second person A begins to yell, and certainly if they begin to curse, person B completely, the hearing has turned off, and they don't hear anything else but the fact that that person is yelling at them or cursing at them, and that is it, not hearing what's actually being said about what's upsetting that person. So the more we can control our emotional aspect of a conversation and say, this is not cool when you do this. I really don't want you to do this. Can you please not do this? I won't do this to you. If you won't do this to me, could you not do that? So communicating without heightened emotion allows the person B to hear at least the words you're saying. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to take accountability for what they're doing or that they're going to change or be sorry. But what I am saying is at least they are more likely to hear you. Some people just shut down when they start to hear yelling, and they never even heard anything that you said. Uh, Not taking things personal also can be helpful. Some people just are miserable and they just try to spread the seeds of their misery to anybody. Yes, they may be talking to you at a given moment, but you see, they actually do this to every single person with whom they interact. That's them. That's not something to necessarily take as personally because yes, they're talking to you in the moment, but they this is really about them. This comes down to when hurt people. This has to do with them, not really even me. So thank you. I'm just gonna slide this negative emotion right on back to you. Thank you. So you don't have to engage in that. just because someone else wants to bring your day down and make you have a bad holiday or just at any time. And thinking of lighthearted responses to ongoing jabs can be helpful too. If someone tries to come and pick at you, just like, oh, you chose violence today, okay, but you know what, I'm gonna give that back to you, so you're good, and I'm gonna go over here. Not having to necessarily be serious. Sometimes humor can really diffuse a lot of things. What you said was true, but lighthearted. You said it in a lighthearted manner, and no, thank you for that too. And sometimes just using some of the things that you see around you and talking about them, particularly since other people are experiencing them too, can be very cathartic. So sometimes people use what they experience in life for writing, to write books, both nonfiction and fiction, or fiction loosely based on the truth, for example. Blog about it, all sorts of things, and just kind of get all of that out. Process it that way. And then sometimes scheduling therapy appointments before and after stressful events can be very helpful. Just I can give an example of a time where I spoke to someone and they were going to a wedding, and they were really worried about how they would interact with someone at this wedding. And so we talked about like what that person could do when they saw the person that they were concerned about seeing. And then afterwards, it was mentioned like, oh yeah, this worked out really well. Thank you for that, and it didn't blow up at all like I thought it would. So sometimes, that can be very helpful to get a little guidance and then do some debriefing after. And then lastly, I want to discuss loneliness during the holidays. So loneliness, there's a difference between being alone and loneliness. So one can be alone and be just happy as they want to be. They can be just fine. There's a coworker that I overheard one time. He was invited to someone's house for Thanksgiving. And he said, I'm good. He said, thank you, but I'm good. He said, I have my food. I have my plate of food. I'm going to watch football all day long. And I don't want to be answering a bunch of questions uh, when I'm trying to watch the football game. So thank you. I'll be just fine. So that person was going to be alone, but they were going to be happy. And that's what they wanted. However, loneliness is when you do want that companionship, when you do want that community with one or more people, and you do want to be around others and want to interact with them and be included. But for that matter, one can feel lonely even with other people around if they feel like they're not included. So that's the difference between being alone and loneliness. And some things that you can do, if you're going to be alone for the holidays, is sometimes to first maybe loosen some of the expectations that one might have, whether your own or someone else's, when it comes to what people should be doing on the holidays. You should be doing whatever it is that you are okay doing. I would not try to get too caught up in what it looks like other people are doing, or what they say that they're doing, or how it's going to be. Sometimes you really actually don't know what goes on in other people's homes ever, really, once that door closes. So sometimes it may feel like, oh, everybody's together and everybody has somebody and everybody has a family and I don't, and but you really don't know what is going on. And so first, kind of loosening expectations, and comparing yourself to yourself and not others, is one great start. And then mindfulness. Sometimes you just need to acknowledge the loneliness. So this is how I'm feeling, which is part of mindfulness, to acknowledge your feelings, but not necessarily to dwell in it. You may also want to be mindful of what may trigger the loneliness or unpleasant feelings. Sometimes social media does it, sometimes TV. It may not be the greatest time to watch a string of Christmas movies where that is the thing, where it's about a lot of people getting together, or romance or things like that. But maybe another genre of movies, so horror or sci-fi or something, like whatever you're interested in. Um, Acknowledging what gives you joy and being mindful with it. So, what do you like to do? Do you like to do model planes? Maybe picking one up the day before Christmas, that you can work on, or work on your car, or go to the library or the bookstore, and ask the librarian of the bookstore clerk, hey, I really like um, comedy. Like what's a really good book out right now? What do you suggest? And kind of delving into that on that holiday. So, what does give you joy, and being mindful with that? Maybe going to a restaurant the day before, picking up your meal, getting it, having the meal catered. So all kinds of things to allow you to focus on your day to celebrate in a way that would bring you joy. And we want to use the acronym HALT when we have some decisions to make sometimes or make judgment calls. The acronym HALT is hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So the recommendation is to not make judgment calls or limit decision making when you're hungry. H, when you're angry. A, certainly when you're hangry. When you're lonely. L, or when you're tired. T, because sometimes we don't make the best judgment calls. And sometimes when you're lonely, you may let your guard down and may not, it may not make the best call as far as like, it might not be the best time to call an ex that you had bit that you were always falling out with, that just that person's not the best person for you, so that may not be the best time to do that. So kind of being able to make those judgment calls, um, or might be mindful of making judgment calls when you're in that space, but also it does include loneliness as well, to be careful about the decisions that we make. um, and we talked about finding an outlet or hobby, project, something you can look forward to, and what a way to make the day special for yourself. I know some people who have lost many loved ones, and so they take a vacation every year on Thanksgiving, around Christmas, so that is their new tradition. Since they don't have their loved ones anymore, that's instead of taking their trips in the summer like they used to, now they take their trips in the winter, or going to a neighbor's house. See if there's anything that they need that you can do for them. Volunteering on that day. Volunteering can not only meet someone else's needs, but there's nothing like volunteering to help get your mind off of yourself, and to do God's will, to do God's work. Calling up a church member with who you haven't talked to in a while. So several ways to spend the day, to limit loneliness. And then lastly, I like to talk about relapse of addictions. For those who are in recovery and trying to seek recovery of addictions, whether that be, again, any substance use, alcohol or drugs, or like gambling. We have gas stations with slot machines and scratch offs, and um, people with sex addictions, who compulsively pick at their skin or pull their hair, that kind of thing. And so be careful that relapse of addictions can occur during times where one may be lonely, or just any sort of stress, really. And you want to be mindful of those occurrences. So whether small or large triggers that can bring on relapse, or the tendency to relapse, and maybe having a written plan is good. So kind of identifying, so these are my triggers, and when I experience these triggers, when I'm reminded of this, when this time of year comes around, those type of things, then these are my triggers. And then what are the things that I say or do or start thinking, that let me know that I may be close to relapse. When I start saying, well, I can drink, I can take a drink, I can control it. If it's just one, it's not like I'm drinking like what I was drinking. Or if you like want to, I just want to drive around there to see, like the old friends at the block, and just see what they're doing. Things like that, kind of inching closer to past use, or past harmful behaviors. Those are those actions that you want to be mindful of. So watching triggers, thoughts, words, or actions that can lead to relapse, because relapse isn't just the time where one does take a drink or use again. It's really the things leading up to it, and then, yeah, the relapse itself. And then lastly, what are some coping skills or mechanisms one can use, you can use to avoid the relapse? So is there somebody, like a go-to person you can call? Sometimes that would be a sponsor if you attend AA or Alcoholics Anonymous, or Narcotics Anonymous for drugs, but there are a lot of anonymous medias. There's Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, etc. Do you have a sponsor with them? There's also Smart Recovery too. That's another group. Or is it like a trusted friend, loved one, who is your go-to person where you can call? Or is it reading your Bible? When I start getting stressed and I start thinking about relapsing, then I read my Bible, and then I feel better. I know that I'm not alone, that God is with me. So, just wanted to kind of mention that as well, that some of the things that we've been talking about today can lead to relapse. So, I wanted to specifically touch on that. So, I spoke earlier about Grief Share being a resource. There are other resources as well that can be very helpful. There is the Georgia Collaborative website, and it can link you to outpatient treatment, therapy, medication. It can lead you to inpatient treatment. These are just different types of treatments, not necessarily that those are warranted, but just letting you know, just any type of treatment from the least type to the more severe type. But it also including the group therapy that we talked about, individual therapy, you can find there, including sliding scale payment options. Um, there are also websites, therapyforblackgirls.com, referring to girls and women, and then therapyforblackmen.org is also a website that can be very helpful. So I pray that your holidays are peaceful, um, and that you are well. And I thank you for listening. God bless.